Hello and welcome to the first podcast in our operational resilience campaign. I'm Jo Fulford, wealth consultant at Simplify Consulting, and for today's podcast, I'm joined by Jan Baumgartner, head of operational resilience at Nucleus, Phil Turnpenny, policy executive at Tizer, and our own Simplify wealth consultants, Chris Lamb and Mike Penny. Thank you all for joining us today. Our Ops Resilience campaign focuses attention on readiness for March 2025, where after years of testing and implementing, firms will need to evidence to the regulators that they're able to remain operating within their set impact tolerances in the event of disruption. As part of the campaign, we cover scenario planning, tolerances, investment impacts, third-party management, and embedding the Ops Resilience framework. So be sure to look out for our series of blogs and podcasts over the next couple of weeks to find out more. The overarching theme for today's discussion is around the bigger picture when it comes to embedding operational resilience in the wealth management industry. A lot of focus has been on cyber resilience and third-party dependencies, but we know that delivering resilience means thinking about people and processes alongside external supply chain or technology dependencies. So Chris, if I could come to you first, do you think the wealth industry's understanding of tolerance has changed with the introduction of the Ops Resilience regime? And when assessing Ops Resilience, how should firms determine the tolerances for their critical customer-facing activities?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Really good questions there. And I think just talking about tolerances, obviously we spoke with the likes of Yang before this, and you could probably have a whole podcast in its own right, just discussing tolerances. So I'll try and keep this fairly concise.
Yeah,
So thinking about ops resilience in wealth, and I suppose actually wider FS for that matter, as well. It's not just thinking about like system downtime during disruptions. My view is I think it's a very singular view, and it is far wider than that. Aspects that should really be considered are the likes of recovery time, costs, effort, and the broader impact that that has on customers and the associated transactions as well. So the question really is in terms of how can a firm get back to their normal operating rhythm, with as little impact to customers and also their staff, and as quickly as possible. Um, so with that, I think you need to start thinking about how much risk the firm can really handle, and the controls that you have in place to manage that risk as well. So just kind of imagine customers not being able to access their accounts for hours, the frustration and probably anxiety that comes with that as well, particularly if they wanted to make kind of a really important payment, could be something like a house purchase or something. So the consequences that come with that, is obviously a loss of trust in your firm's ability to kind of safeguard their finances. But I think from a team perspective as well, the pressure that comes with that. So trying to fix the issues on the fly, dealing with panic calls from customers, it kind of just spells a big recipe for disaster in my opinion.
yeah,
And like identifying your IBSs and setting impact tolerances, I think this really helps firms recognize their own vulnerabilities. Obviously, that's fundamental for the creation of plans and ultimately looking to mitigate some of these disruptions, as well. These things are pretty standard now. They're mandated by the FCA and the PRU. Obviously, there's a case for doing it properly. If you do it properly, customers are going to experience fewer disruptions, better service continuity, and you're going to kind of maintain that trust through these situations, as well. And just moving on to kind of our client perspective as well. So we've obviously done a lot of work around ops resilience with our clients over the last couple of years. And I think what we've seen a lot of is that impact tolerances are time bound. And of course, this makes sense, but I don't think that is the full picture. Other metrics for consideration, so the type of customers affected, transaction values, potential losses incurred. Obviously, all of those are going to be equally as important to consider. Um, and you may also have different tolerances within the same IBS, for kind of different scenarios that should be factored in. And that's something else that we're finding more and more of, as well. So just kind of bringing that to life a bit in terms of an example. So if we look at payment processing, so there'll be tolerances for different client groups, such as those who might get regular income versus one-off disposals, or money coming in on platforms where it's kind of just sat as cash before being invested versus your ISA subs. So there's multiple perspectives that this review and consideration really needs to be factoring in. And obviously using a variety of metrics really ensures that customers are going to be prioritized and responses are going to be tailored to this as well. And I think just to finish off as well, I've touched on the staff element a couple of times, but I think by embedding these kind of principles, so to say, it's going to provide a clearer roadmap for staff. I think that's going to be really important as well. Ultimately, they will then have a comprehensive understanding of these different scenarios. It allows the staff, the teams, etc., to plan accordingly. Disruptions are inevitable, and preparation is obviously a necessity with what we're working with in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And you're right on the money around disruptions are inevitable. And as an industry, I suppose we're used to looking at that through our business continuity planning. And Jan, if I could come to you next, just to kind of hone in on that. So ops resilience is quite far reaching, but much of what firms are being asked to evidence, some would say, is already covered by business continuity plans. So how would you say that the expected outcomes for ops resilience are different to the business continuity planning? And specifically when it comes to the scenario planning side of things, what should firms be doing differently?
Yeah, thanks, you. That's a really good question. And I think I'd like to break it up in two separate questions. So I'd like to spend a bit of time to talk about like the difference of business continuity and operational resilience, and then also what should firms do different in terms of scenario testing. So I think if you take business continuity, I think the concept of identifying critical capabilities, processes, as you said, critical resource matrix is not necessarily a new concept, right? It has already been around. But I think business continuity as a concept has clearly evolved as part of operational resilience. I always say you can do business continuity without operational resilience, but you cannot do operational resilience without business continuity. And whilst both of them are two different approaches, and I come into a second to why I believe this is the case, they have a common objective. So I look at operational resilience as our understanding of important business services we provide as a firm and the potential sources of disruption and the harms these disruptions can lead to ourselves, but also to our customers. And I look at business continuity as our ability to maintain service levels throughout a disruption, right? So you see an effective business continuity process ultimately enables operational resilience and allows us to stay within the desired impact tolerances. And whilst these are two different approaches, I think they have one common objective, and that common objective is continuous improvement of the overarching resilience posture. And this continuous improvement, regardless of it, if it is operational resilience, business continuity related, is done through process mapping, through scenario testing, through exercising, training. And I think whilst there are two different approaches, I think it's much more about the integration of both of them rather than running them in conjunction. So I give an example about what we do on our side, and it may help to understand what I'm trying to get to. But if you take the business impact assessment, right? So we have done a business impact assessment which holds around 500 processes, right? And we've reviewed all these processes, including resource requirements, including impacts in terms of the processes disrupted. And what we've done with that is we've taken this from the business continuity framework as our business impact analysis, and we have integrated it and used it as the base for operational resilience. So we've linked it all up from that really lowest level of SOPs and processes into enabling processes such as withdrawals, transfers out, etc. And then ultimately linked it up to a service such as payments out, as an example, right? And what this allows us to do is using the business continuity base, which is already there, to have that 360 view around important business services, and we can exactly pinpoint if one of the resources identified as part of the resource mapping is disrupted, which are the individual processes below which would be disrupted, and how would we make sure that we have effective business continuity plans in place to deal with these disruptions. So different, but I think key is integration to make sure that we have that continuous improvement. And the second part of your question on when it comes to scenario planning, what should firms have been doing differently? Again, I don't think that much about doing things differently. I think it's, again, integration, which is key. I think exercising and testing of business continuity plans is now fundamental, as a fundamental part of understanding resilience and a fundamental part of understanding how we can remain within impact tolerances in severe but plausible scenarios. And I also think that scenario testing as a concept has massively matured throughout the transition period itself in the last couple of years. We've run around 100 scenario tests to date, right? We looked at each single resource and how it affects the underlying processes and the important business services ultimately. And when I say scenario tests, I think the FCA is pretty clear that the scenario testing should evolve from these tabletop-based exercises and include a wider range of testing, such as simulations, live tests, disaster recovery testing, penetration testing, third-party joint scenario testing. And I think, again, if you run these things separately, you'll never get that 360 view. So what we've done is we've integrated everything into the OpsRes framework. So we use disaster recovery testing we do in business continuity to underpin the resilience of our critical resources. We use due diligence reviews we do with third parties to understand whether these third parties can support our important business services, right? And we use penetration testing in our information security department to make sure that the data is sufficiently protected. And I think one of the key points for us as well is the integration of operational resilience, business continuity, and incident management as an overarching function, because one of the things which was more difficult to run in the beginning was obviously the concept of a live test, right? So I cannot just switch off electricity, or I cannot just switch off a data center, right? But what you can do is you can integrate incident management with business continuity and ultimately operational resilience. And by documenting these operational incidents as live tests, you can then get the same information from these incidents, right? You can understand which important business services have been impacted. How long has the incident been around? When was it closed? Have any impact tolerances been affected, potentially breached? And ultimately, most importantly, is it allows you on the back of these live incidents to understand your lessons learned and then ultimately apply that to your continuous improvement process. So I know I said it quite a couple of times now, but I think it's wrong to look at them differently. I think the key is really integration of everything into a wider operational resilience framework, and making sure you have that 360 view on operational resilience.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Jan, for that insight. You're absolutely right. Ops resilience is very wide-reaching, as is business continuity, and it's the breadth of the requirement through the regulation that it is really coming to life through the OpsRes regime. I think as we get closer to the 31st of March and bringing this all together, Mike, if I could come to you, what key areas do you think that boards should be prioritising in their evaluations to demonstrate their readiness?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think what Jan's just gone into there is really what needs to be evidenced. So I think it really needs to be apparent the roles and responsibilities have been clearly defined within the firm and understood by all. it should also be demonstrated that the accountability for operational resilience sits at board level, and the board has taken an active role in developing the firm strategy. Simply, you would expect it to include justification of all the decisions that have been made over the kind of transformation project life cycle. In terms of how firms evidence their readiness, they need to make a holistic approach. They need to take a holistic approach. And by that, I mean they are able to evidence how operational resilience has been integrated across all their business areas. So echoing back to what Jan's said before, evidencing ops resilience is just the new normal, and therefore needs to be embedded within a firm's culture as well. So firms should also be clear on how this will evolve with any strategic or regulatory changes. The regulators should be able to see how it has been embedded into BAU as well, and the business can demonstrate how these considerations factor into the day-to-day running the business. So furthermore, how will they continue to monitor and assess ops resilience going forward? Any self-assessments and scenario testing conducted will need to be included in the reports and documented as well, including what the disruption to the 5 pillars of resilience will be. So those being people, technology, location, information, and suppliers. You need to consider them all. In addition, firms will need to consider that they've documented, need to ensure, that they've documented any dependencies or controls to effectively manage all of these elements if a disruption were to occur. So overall, they need to have evidence that they've tested their response plans and how they're mitigating workarounds, ensure they'll be able to remain within their tolerance levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched there on a really hot topic actually, which is that of the suppliers. And there is a need under the ops resilience regime for a lot of evidence in readiness for this deadline. As you said, how do you sit within that tolerance? And what I think we've seen with some of our other clients is there's a lot of tacit knowledge of what firms do on a day-to-day basis, but documenting that and expressing it with that level of detail is actually quite a challenge. And with that in mind, Phil, if I could just come to you, yes, with that, particularly through that lens of increased focus on supplier resilience, what challenges have you encountered from your members in establishing resilience of their suppliers in particular?
So yeah, there is quite a few challenges as you've mentioned. We recently had a operational resilience forum, which Tizer hosted, and the FCA. We had a speaker there, as you know, Joe, from the FCA, and their focus really was on the testing, which Jan's talked about extensively, end-to-end testing, and third parties. So there's quite a lot of talk about the third parties. So the type of things we're hearing is there's general challenges with the large cloud service providers, so your bigger IT companies, your platforms, your Amazon, Google's type large institutions. So getting the information you need to be able to review that the assessments are done. We have heard of some refusing to share DR test results as well. And there's a bit of a concern as well around the critical third-party paper, which is due by the end of the year, which should have a cover such suppliers, but there's a concern there may be a chunk of them missed off the list. And that leaves you in a potential situation that in the event of a loss of a large supplier, who do you get to do that work? It's a big challenge. There's also a lot of talk around further down the chain as well. So you've got if you had a third-party administrator doing your work, who does their work in effect? So who's further down the chain? What IT do they use? So it's not being able to see further down the line the visibility of what's going on down there. So that's the challenge also. That's probably the main parts. But then you also get into, if they do fail, your contracts in the right state, fit state. Supplier resistance to oversight and audits, maybe, because it's just more things you're going to be asking them as well. So it's quite a big piece, I'd say. and probably the trickiest piece. So based on the fact that the FCA were talking about it, they obviously have some concerns.
Yeah, I think just linking back into that, Phil, you're right. We're at the forum, the FCA actually referenced that the biggest root cause that they've had reported this year so far is third-party supplier failures. So it is a key area, and we know with the critical third-party rules coming in next year that will complement the ops resilience regime, which is really good to see, and just helping to strengthen those relationships as well for customer outcomes, to make sure that firms can continue to deliver if and when disruption were to happen. Some really interesting points from you all today, and I'm really grateful for you joining me. This sort of, I think, ties in nicely as well to we've got a blog coming out which will tackle in more detail that third party dependency and the relationship between outsourcers and firms. So watch out for that one. So just finally from me, a big thank you, Jan, Phil, Chris and Mike, for sharing your views and perspectives today. And to all those listening, be sure to follow the rest of our Ops Resilience campaign via LinkedIn or our website. And of course, if you need any support with Ops Resilience readiness, don't hesitate to get in touch with us here at Simplify. Thank you.